Hi guys, I'm going to be talking to us this week about trauma-informed practices. I've used trauma-informed practices in my own classroom a lot for the past few years. I have taught 3rd and 4th grade in Decatur, which had a lot of high crime and low socioeconomic statuses. We had a lot of issues with mental illness and behavior problems within school. And now I am teaching junior high and high school students that have behavioral and emotional issues in Leroy, and we also take students that are out of district, the surrounding districts. If they are not being successful in their homeschool, we take them in our building, and it is seriously a lifesaver using these different sorts of methods and being more trauma informed, because I can understand where the students are coming from, and I'm a huge believer in this, and I really want to share these thoughts with you guys, and hopefully you'll be able to take something back into your own classroom. So first we're going to look at what is trauma. And trauma is any sort of stressful experience that you have had in your life. We're going to specifically be looking at childhood traumas. And a lot of it can come from different situations, such as divorce, death of a parent, a different abuse. And experiencing trauma can also contribute to the emergence of different disabilities and brain development. And about 1 in 4 children experience a potentially traumatic event before they are even 3 years old. Trauma can also lead and contribute to post-traumatic stress disorder, and up to 80% of people experience traumatic events. And within that 80% of people that have gone through a traumatic event, 7% of them can develop post-traumatic stress disorder. This can lead to physical and mental health issues such as anxiety and depression. As teachers, it's really important for us to recognize some of the different signs of trauma. I'm sure we've all had that situation in our classroom where we've noticed different behaviors out of a student and we're not quite sure what's going on in the home environment, but you have some suspicions. And trauma can be displayed in a few different ways. Generally, it's going to be internalized, externalized, depending on the child. And we're going to take a look at the internalizing behaviors and externalizing behaviors. The symptoms can be categorized into re-experiencing, avoidance, and hyperarousal. And when we're looking at cases that internalize behaviors, we're seeing them withdraw from normally loved activities. They have difficulty concentrating. They can sometimes have nightmares or flashbacks about the different events that have happened to them. And we've all definitely experienced that child that's had a temper tantrum in our classroom. And a lot of that can come from going through a traumatic experience. Examples of people who externalize, generally they've got heightened emotions and they can be crying, they can be angry, and in more extreme cases, they have self-deprecation, they can self-harm. I've personally had a few students who have self-harmed, and although it is just the most heartbreaking thing in the world, if I don't understand what is going on with them and recognizing that they are going through some sort of traumatic event, I am not going to be able to help them very well. And trauma has a direct effect on the brain. It causes some breakdown in connectivity, and the younger the child is, the worse the impact on their brain development is. Also, going through chronic stress, it can impact people's anxiety, their memory, executive functions, social, emotional well-being, and their mood. So next we're going to take a look at a brain scan. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at the scan that I have up here. So we are looking at 2 3-year-old children. The one on the left is a normal child who has not had any sort of neglect or experiences related to trauma. And the one on the right has gone through extreme neglect. So when we're looking at the one on the left who hasn't experienced any sort of trauma, their brain is developing normally. You can see the connections being made, and it is the right size. And compared to the one on the right, which has gone through some sort of traumatic event, you can clearly see that there's a difference. The neglected kid's head is smaller, very significantly as compared to the normal child. And you can see that they're just not developing the connections that are necessary. As teachers, we work with students who come from all sorts of different environments. And it's hard for us to kind of measure these experiences, especially if you haven't had to go through any sort of professional development with trauma-informed. So if you have gone through any trauma-informed training, I'm sure that you have heard of the ACEs system that measures adverse childhood experiences. And this is a research-based system, and it was developed after a 1998 study on different childhood experiences. People were asked a series of categorized questions in a questionnaire, and they wanted to have them reflect on their childhood, and they categorized 7 different exposures on this, and those included physical, psychological, sexual, substance abuse, mental illness, mother's treatment, and criminal activity. So the effects of trauma founded from this study are very, very interesting to look at. More than half of the respondents said they experienced at least one exposure to a category, and 6.2% that said that they had had at least 4 exposures. Substance abuse was the most frequent of the exposures. So the authors said that they found a link between different coping mechanisms that people had, such as drinking, using drugs, whether using these coping mechanisms were conscious or unconscious. It was kind of connected to the idea that if you have gone through sort of traumatic experiences, you are going to be using coping mechanisms to try and combat the trauma that you have gone through if you do not have the proper interventions. So next we're going to take a look at an actual ACE questionnaire, and we're going to do an activity where we're going to take the quiz ourselves and we're going to reflect on our score. I do want to say up front that you do not have to share anything that you do not want to with the group, but take this more as then a personal reflection. So we are going to try and think about situations that you have had also as a teacher in your classroom. So we're going to have you look at this as your personal ACE questionnaire, and then experiences that you have had in your classroom with students. So I'll go ahead and read through the questions really quickly. Number 1, did a parent or other adult in the household swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you feel afraid that you might be physically hurt? Number 2, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Number 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years or older than you ever touch or fondle you, have them touch their body in a very sexual way, attempted to or have had any sort of actual intercourse with you? Number 4, did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Number 5, did you feel that you didn't have enough to eat, wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Number 6, were your parents ever separated or divorced? Number 7, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or was repeatedly hit at least a few minutes, or was threatened with a gun or a knife? Number 8, did you ever live with someone who was a problem drinker or alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Number 9, was a household member depressed, mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Number 10, did a household member go to prison? So you're going to go ahead and you're going to add up your answers for yes, and depending on what that is your ACE score. So we are going to go into Padlet, and we're going to be reflecting on these different questions. So how did your score reflect your childhood growing up? Did you feel any different about how you grew up? And I will put this in the Padlet myself, but, and again, you don't have to share your answers if you do not want to, but I am so incredibly fortunate that I have a 0 as a score. I'm very, very blessed that my parents gave me such a wonderful life. And how can I feel apologies. How do I feel any different about how I grew up? I am definitely a little bit more thankful. I am sad to see so many of my students go through these things when I never had to experience that. And it makes me, again, just really thankful for how I grew up. When looking at the questions, do you think of any situations from your job that you came across with as a student? And looking to analyze that situation a little bit more, do the experiences match with the student issues? One example that I had was one of my students that I had in 3rd and 4th grade. I looped because I wanted to stay with my students. He had gone through a lot of domestic violence in the house, and his parents did split up, a lot of drugs and alcohol, and he had a lot of externalizing behaviors. It's very, very clear that he has gone through some trauma, and just thinking about him, he would have an ACE score of about a 5 or a 6, knowing what he has gone through conversations with him as well as conversations with the mother. Good news is he is doing much, much better this year in 5th grade, and I'm looking forward to hearing more success for him. And one last question that we can look at is, how can you apply an ACE questionnaire in the classroom? With younger students, it wouldn't be appropriate to be asking them specific questions such as that. But maybe if you teach high school students, you could go through some sort of questionnaire activity similar to this and take it as an opportunity to reflect on past experiences. For younger students, I might suggest doing a I wish my teacher knew activity. And if you haven't heard of this, you ask your students, what's something that you would like me to know about you. You can have them write it on a Post-it note and hand it to you, and it's a private conversation between you and the students. And this works especially for students that don't always vocalize their needs, and maybe they just want to write that down and share that with you, but they're too afraid to do it orally. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop here. And I will let you go ahead and take a look at the Padlet on ReggieNet, and we will continue with how we can combat all this trauma as teachers.